Wait a second. Before we start, it's been a shitty week, and that music is delightful. So I'm going to invoke producer privilege and do it again.
Okay.
Deep breaths. All is right is rain. Right is rain. So, this is our weekly ritual of transmission. Once daily, now once weekly.
No, once
because
weekly.
we're too potent,
That's
too powerful. Right. People are overdosing with their goodness.
Or too ineffective. One or the other.
I got a new ingredient effective charge this week.
Yeah.
It's from the same person. We're talking about shady stuff, but before we start talking about the actual topic, Dan and I were talking about Minneapolis public schools potentially coming to an agreement, but it just shows how shitty things are. That if there is an agreement, it's going to be underwhelming. Meanwhile, the police department, Minneapolis Police Department, who's world renowned for its excellence, got a new contract where they got higher income, more bonuses, and no change in accountability. And that's kind of slipped right in there as the teachers were striking, who were like, here's a donut and 25 cents more an hour. It's like, major historic victory. I'm simplifying it. I'm not oversimplifying the police thing. It's as shitty as that is, but the union stuff with the teachers is a little bit better than that, but not by much.
Yeah.
Should I play the music a third
time? No.
Just to pivot to more happy thoughts, and we'll announce ourselves in a second, because I don't know if we've done that lately, but we're talking about kind of a couple of events that are different but overlapping, of representatives of the dominant culture trying to keep people out, being rational about it. One of them, the one that I've been tracking more of, because it affects me more personally, I think, in some ways, is Lia Thomas, is the trans swimmer who's basically being treated like some sort of like pervert aggressor for swimming as a woman. And the other one being the Supreme Court hearings, where I don't know how you want to frame that. Like, go ahead, you frame it.
Yeah. Well, so the specter of three white men from the South screaming at and abusing a black woman about being a sexual pervert,
oh my God,
it is pretty much like the oldest trope in America. So I get to talk about a new book. This was all set up.
A new book. It's not one you wrote, though.
So no.
It's not self-aggrandizing.
It's an old book, but it's new to being mentioned on here. And a hat tip to Gregory, who turned me on to this. So this is a huge tome.
Turn it to its side profile. So that is huge. That's like Game of Thrones huge.
Well, and this is another one of these books that. So first of all, this isn't a super new book. This was first published in 1978. And
it's like 44 years old.
Yeah, and it's one of these books. It has 100 pages of bibliography and footnotes, so that makes the actual book shorter.
Yeah, it's pretty much a pamphlet then.
Yeah. So it is looking at the legal structure that helped create slavery and racism, right? And so, he's detailing all of this case law from the colonies, and he's looking at, he starts with Virginia, and then he looks at Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Massachusetts, and so one of the oldest examples of case law that he starts with is a case from, I believe it's 1648, somewhere in the 1600s. The 1640s. And so it is a case about how a white man raped a black woman who got pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to give you 3 guesses because Ash hasn't read this book. So who do you think got punished as a result of this activity?
Well, I have 3 guesses.
You have 3 guesses.
I'm going to make 2 choices.
You got 3 guesses and there's only 2 choices.
The mother and child.
Yeah, so the black woman gets whipped publicly and the white guy goes free.
Of course, that's how.
So, this case law, as I said, is from the mid 1600s, right? So we're talking, close to 500 years ago. Basically, we see the same thing being reenacted in the United States Senate these last couple of weeks, right? So here you have these white men who, again, are the sort of holders of this history of rape and abuse and separating families and, killing children. I mean, just, horrors on and on and on and on. And they have the audacity to accuse probably one of the most brilliant people that's ever been nominated for the Supreme Court. They are essentially accusing her of being a child pornographer. And they sort of expect that everybody's going to, believe them and buy into this. And, the white GOP is jumping on the bandwagon about this and, thinks that this is just this horrible thing that, again, here's this, loose black woman is going to be on the Supreme Court. And so we're seeing these racial and sexual dynamics getting played out at, the highest levels of government. And we should really be truly horrified by this, deeply, deeply horrified and concerned. And, the backdrop, of course, is also then this effort by a number of people to try to get the accurate history of America taught, which these same white people, of course, don't want. Because then you'd read books like this, right? And you'd find out, like, oh, the black woman gets raped and she gets punished and the white guy goes free. Like, gee, that doesn't sound very good to me, right? And they don't want people thinking about that. They don't want people thinking about that.
No. I have something to say, but before, like, what's the author's name? I saw, is it Leon? That last name is like a Cumberbatch level last name. So
yes, Higginbotham.
And Leon I'm going to say Higginbotham.
Higginbotham, yeah, and he's actually a member of the Johnson administration. I mean, he's a very well known guy in sort of national politics at the time.
Not for us,
very outstanding. Yeah,
but like it's good to know that I respect a good last name.
Yes.
When a name is more unwieldy and robust than Van Steenwyck, I'm happy because it makes me feel simple.
So, I mean, he was a judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. He's taught a number of law schools, and he was in the Johnson administration as the vice chair of the National Commission for the Prevention of Violence. So,
someone with respected bona fides, like not some sort of frothy mouthed Marxist scholar from Berkeley.
Exactly.
Are my favorite people. I'm not dissing that. I'm just saying, like, if people are interested in wanting respectable voices,
yes,
then you can't just dismiss a book like that because it's as respectable as it comes, really.
Yeah.
Unless you're
absolutely.
To pivot, because here's the thing. 2 different examples we're giving of Lia Thomas, and I have not heard Justice Jackson's first name pronounced, so I don't even want to attempt. Do you know how it's supposed to be pronounced?
I've heard it, but I'm so bad with names that.
Yeah, I don't want to disservice her. I'll just refer to her as Justice Brown.
Yeah.
Justice Brown Jackson. People would think these are different sort of examples, and how dare you lump in a black woman with a trans woman? Well, this all ties really fucking together. And it's important we understand this, because our society, it's not an accident. First of all, that one of the things that these esteemed senators asked her is how she defines woman. So this is clearly a political moment we're in, where at the same time, people are trying to resist having the truth taught to kids about history of white supremacy. We're also having moments where we don't want kids being taught about the truth about cis heteropatriarchy, right? Yeah. And so we have these motions to censor teachers about Black history, an honest appraisal of it, and therefore white history. But also efforts to criminalize parents trying to give care to trans children. So this is all lumped together.
And if we want to lump a further person into this, which connects to international issues and economic issues, we've got Brittany Griner, who's been disappeared in Russia. And here is a queer Black athlete who is not nearly getting the level of attention, right? So imagine if this was like LeBron James or Larry Bird.
Or even like, I'm trying to think of like some sort of white tennis lady. I'm trying to think of the most... imagine if like, Jerry West had been disappeared in Russia with it. I mean, this would be on the front page of the New York Times every day. But the fact that it's this queer Black woman, very masculine appearing, very radical in terms of socio-political commentary. I mean, Brittany doesn't take shit from anybody. It's kind of like, oh well, yeah, she can get disappeared in Russia. That's okay. Right. So all of these things, as you say, all of these people as figureheads of this issue are just so emblematic of the same process. White cis hetero, this isn't. So here's the thing. And it really does tie together, because there is white patriarchy, which is the dominant mode of our system. And it's the offspring of Christian supremacy. It all ties together. The history of how we end up with whiteness has to do with Christian supremacy. And it's one of the major levers to pull in order to reinforce and establish patriarchy. And within that, there is a definition of womanhood, of proper womanhood, that fits very white, demure definitions of femininity. And if you don't adhere to that, then you're lesser than. And so one of my friends, Irna, I wish I had created a screenshot of this. I could share this now. She posted that anything people are saying about trans female athletes has been said about Black women in the past. And I posted a long ass thing on Facebook that kind of gives a full, really long. The best thing that I found on it, like from a biologist who is a former college swimmer, who's also, it's a biologist. And they talk about this history of this anxiety about whether or not someone's a woman enough to be competing in sports is old as hell. And it's come up as part of the impulse towards the Red Scare, like these Russian gymnasts and swimmers aren't female enough. It's come up when Black female athletes want to compete. It's coming up with now trans. So there's a thread there. And so if people are going to wade into these sorts of arguments, which are complex, like I'm not going to say that there's not a conversation to be had, because, these governing bodies for athletics have to look at different things like doping and hormone levels, whatever. I don't understand that enough to weigh in. But if people are going to weigh in, they should know whether or not they're reinforcing horrific tropes about femininity or not, and what conversation they're unwittingly jumping into. Same thing with, Justice Jackson's. You could disagree with her or have crabbiness about Supreme Court justices. But if you start kind of like adding the negativity without realizing that this is part of a long freaking history of white men oppressing and vilifying black women as being irrational, savage, sexual beings that are perverts. If we don't understand that and just say, yeah, she's kind of a piece of shit, and just lay into that, we are doing harm without realizing it. So it's important to understand the context of how both of these women, now 3 women, are being used in some way to reinforce white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, and every bad thing in our society.
Yeah, and another example, I mean, and the fact that, like, we could just sit here and spend the whole half hour coming up with examples, like, without any commentary, right? So another great example of this is you look at the contrast of what happened, with the Russian skater and her doping, versus with Katari Richardson and her smoking pot legally before the Olympics, right? And so in the one case, you've got this, very nice, actually a child, a white woman, but she's 15, so she's a child. Everybody feeling sorry for her. Oh, she should compete, da 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 da. And I'm sure it's not her fault that she was taking this banned substance. However, she is part of the system, and she was taking a banned substance. A lot of sympathy. With Richardson, who, again, smoked pot is legal in California where she smoked it, a muscular, strong black woman is taken out of the Olympics, right? Taken out of the Olympics, not allowed to compete. What is the difference between these 2 people? You have to look at it. It has a lot to do with color and with how do we perceive femininity.
Yeah, a misguided, not very applicable definition of femininity, which is a whole thing that's part of the contested thing. Like, which we should have a whole conversation about what is femininity at some point, because it's murky territory, and it's one that I've stumbled into and upset a whole bunch of people by asserting that I have something like that. Some comments coming in. Some of these are from earlier. Ellen writes, Woody Guthrie's "This Land" has issues, for sure. But I enjoy the verse. As I was walking that lonely highway, I saw a sign there, said no trespassing. But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. This land was made for you and me. That's my favorite part of that song, too. And it's the one that's left out when you sing it in school. Ellen writes, in experiences with imposter syndrome, I usually feel the same feeling as trespassing. I mean, that's a whole other angle to this. It's like, where does imposter syndrome come from?
Right.
Again, just to loop in yet another savory tidbit, part of how capitalism functions is to assign a sense of logical merit to this whole thing. So that the idea is, if you do well, it's because you've deserved it. If you don't, you don't. And so it's trying to create some sort of rationale that's largely a mythic idea, not made up, about, well, if you're suffering, it's because you didn't do well. Right. So this imposter syndrome is an internalized way of saying, like, look, I'm second guessing myself and whether or not I deserve things. Because of this, and creating boundaries similarly to trespassing signs, right? You have to have the right degrees, you have to have the right amount of money to go to these schools, to get this, that, or the other thing. And if you don't have all that stuff, you don't have any wisdom, you don't have anything worth sharing. All those kinds of things. And that's the other level of what is so toxic of what we see with the Supreme Court thing, right? I mean, here is a woman, she is more qualified than any of the people who are on the Supreme Court. I mean, I'm sure people have seen these graphs, these tables of, what kinds of service has she done? Where has she been? And, she literally checks all the boxes.
the last two nice white people that they shoved down our throats to put on the court, like barely check any of them. And so even when you say, okay, well, I should be in because I have all the boxes. Well, now we got to find another way to discredit you and put you on the outside, right? And it's because of all these other kinds of things. And so, that's the insidiousness of this trespassing piece, is that you just keep moving the goalposts backwards, you keep moving the fences, all with the idea of maintaining this white supremacy.
Another thing from Ellen: finding work without a bachelor's when there are anywhere from 100 to 7,000 other applicants, or finding living quarters with a bad credit score gives me major trespass vibes. Yeah, the bad credit thing, it's interesting. Like, I don't know if we've ever brought this up, but I remember back when people were freaking out about China having some sort of like social benefit score, like basically determining whether or not people were trustworthy in society as a way of kind of like giving them privileges or demerits. And people were acting like how totalitarian that is, which it is. But like, FICO, what the hell is FICO? It's only one metric that determines the sum totality of most of our lives and transactions.
Yeah. And it's very interesting how that has blossomed, right? As the digital age has continued to move forward. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't even get your credit score, right? It was like some secret thing that these organizations had, and you had to apply in writing, and you could maybe get it once a year, and basically nobody paid attention to it. It really was not a big deal or a big issue, right? And now it has blossomed as this major thing where it not only can you get it at any moment's notice, and it's changing all the time, but now people are making money off of apps where you can do things to increase your credit score, by 1 or 2 points, so you can get a better deal on your debt. It's unbelievable.
I don't remember what was said specifically about this, so maybe you can remember, Dan. Veronica asked, where are you getting that definition of women universally within the Christian community?
Well, I think we were talking about the sort of purity definition of woman. I think that's what you're referring to, and I mean, that's just a very, very common thing within.
Yeah, I'm not saying any and all Christians, but there's definitely look at within Catholicism. Look at how Mary's held up. Yeah. We might say, like, I might think my vision of Mary might be Magnificat Mary, where it's like like the Ben Wildflower woodcut that's on people's t-shirts of like her stepping on a snake, wearing like Doc Martin holding a fist in the air, and with revolutionary sentiment and fierceness. But most people think of it about like women are receptive. They submit to proper authority. They're civil, soft-spoken, and feminine, and motherly. Yeah. And these sorts of, and then you look at idealized
Proverbs
images.
31 woman, all the purity culture stuff. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
And while there are exceptions within Christianity, it's still the dominant mode. Most Christians in the world, and particularly most Christian institutions, have some sort of view of complementarity, where women are largely defined as, by definition, subservient to men, and are the opposite. So men are fierce warriors, women are nurturing homemakers, and it gets confusing to people when you blur it too much, which is why it gets offensive if I say I am feminine. Right. Because I don't fit the stereotypes at all, I guess. I think I do. I've even had people who are very affirming of me when I have selfies that look very maternal, saying, I don't think of you as very maternal. It's like, well, why not? Veronica, I believe that is a very limited scope of how women have been depicted and defined within Christianity historically.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd have to you'd have to present some evidence about that. I think that, yes, there have been some exceptions and some places where women have been lifted up in a more powerful way, but it's actually the tiny minority. And this has then been exported back into the non-white world. I was just reading something this morning, this story from Africa. This guy was talking about, this Christian church where this woman shows up. Well, it was a family, and immediately the mother and the family was approached by members of the church and told all the ways in which she was being satanic, and she had to do all these purity things to fix that. And the things that she had done that were satanic was she had a little slit in her dress so you could see a little bit of her leg. And then also she wasn't keeping her children in line in the proper way. And so these were the things that were satanic. And so again, this is this purity culture thing that falls into play.
This adds some nuance, and I just want to address this a little bit. I do not believe that falls into any liberationist Christianity, nor early Christianity. Most of the major religions have a component of patriarchy and limited scope of wisdom, or women, certainly not just Christianity. You're right.
Oh.
Like, I'm not going to argue that somehow Christianity is
well, that's a
different
bad issue.
No, but as Christians, I want to call out my people. And I don't want to get into whataboutisms about like, well, at least we're better off than the Muslims or any kind of argumentation like that, or other religious traditions. And you're right. Like, I mean, I'm looking and I probably have 100 books of liberation theology surrounding me right now, Mujerista theology, womanist theology. Within straight up Latin American liberation theology, there's been issues with patriarchy in there that have been called out. So it's not across the board. In early Christianity, yes, Christianity early on, within its context, was generally a liberationist force for women, but that does not mean it was feminist. Nor, like, and the reason, like, even the way women are framed in scripture, it's selective. So there is this tendency, like early within the Christian tradition, to make Mary Magdalene become traditionally seen as a prostitute. Happened very early on. So are there counterexamples? For sure. The counterexamples of liberation within Christianity are one of the reasons why I having jettisoned the whole thing. Yeah. And I would think of myself personally as an example of someone who's feminine within Christianity, who's a counterexample. So I'm not saying that there aren't, but there's reasons within Christianity that particularly strong, fierce femininity meets resistance institutionally, and it happens a lot.
Right. Yeah. So just to be very clear, Veronica, we're not saying that there aren't these strains in Christianity, but what we are saying is that when you look across the boards at the vast majority of how women have been depicted and portrayed in Christianity, and then when you look in America and you look at, for example, the South and slavery, and the book that I've mentioned many times, Killers of the Dream, which was written by a white woman in the South in the 30s, the 40s, and was incredibly radical at the time. And she details to brilliant and great degree the way in which white femininity was used as a central architectural piece of the development of white supremacy and the maintenance of white supremacy. And this was, of course, 60, 70 years after slavery ended. So, are there exceptions? Yes. Are there other ways of reading these things? Yes. Is that in any way a majority expression? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, and if we could probably quibble over percentages, like, or whatever, or which institutions represent this more than others. I do agree, and I think it's important that we lift up liberationist modes of Christianity,
Mhm.
regardless of whether it's dominant or not. And that's a conversation to have. In this case, we're talking about what influences dominant society, which is a form of Christianity. And that's the thing I think we're trying to call out.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a question of tactical strategies, I guess, like how much we say what's normative or not. But at the very least, there's a shitty version of Christianity that has a lot of power that we're calling out.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to dismiss the weight and goodness of other expressions. But at the same time, it calls itself Christianity. It's very powerful and it's shitty. And we need to call it out. At the end of the day, I think we probably agree on something like that. Alan writes, when I was a visiting pastor, a congregant told me, I wish they would hire a young man. The young women pastors just get married and leave us to start their family. I was told later that had never happened at
this church. Okay, but this next one is
again, as a visitation pastor, I was also told by an older gentleman congregant, I want to fuck. I have a real hard time thinking he said that to a male pastor. No, and I've get this is, this is the thing.
I'm really sorry that happened to you.
And I don't want to pick on you, Veronica, but this is part of what's at stake here, and why I don't want to give too much ground to the idea that there's a strong, robust, almost co-dominant form of liberationist Christianity. It's because when we start thinking like that, we often try to create exceptions. So I'm pretty sure Elena's experiences within the Mennonite Church, maybe not exclusively, but within the Mennonite Church, which tends to think of itself on the right side of things, these sorts of dominant views of male perpetration run wild. And so, like, when you bring it up in specific contexts about violent aggressors within the Mennonite Church, there's resistance because we, the Mennonite Church, aren't like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're trying to convince Mennonites that it's more normative for patriarchal violence to be enshrined than it is for women liberation to be enshrined is a hard sell. And so it's very complicated, but it's important that we kind of recognize that our systems are enmeshed in ways that contribute to oppression, and Christianity is complicit in that in most expressions of it. Veronica writes, I'm well aware and I'm fairly well read on the topic as well. I just don't think it's fair to continue to define Christianity as such currently. Dominion perspective is everywhere, both within and outside of our shared community of progressive liberationist Christians, Christians of all kind. Okay. Well, Ellen, so no, this was UMC congregation. Mennonite experience has been a little more subtle. Yeah. Mennonite Methodists are also guilty of the same thing, but yes, you're right. Mennonites are sneakier as institutions.
All right. Well,
the definition question is like a.
I think we should wrap up.
And
I think my encouragement is really just the continued development of awareness, because a lot of what we're talking about are these subtle, sometimes not so subtle, ways that we have been programmed to look at people, to think about things, the way the concepts have been defined, right? Masculine, feminine, man, woman, qualified, not qualified. And we need to critique those, and we need to look very clearly into ourselves and say, well, how have I been formed? And we need to look at the formation that is getting played out in society, because in most societies there are dominant oppressors, and they want to define all these things in ways that only increase boundaries that are unhelpful and unhealthy. And, as we've seen in just a very short period of time, you can find a lot of examples of this. And so we want to encourage you to continue to work for liberation from these oppressive structures.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to be too shitty about it, but like those comments about like defining Christianity, like Dan and I disagree on how we approach the definition of Christianity thing. So I know that there's complexity with this. I tend to like take a sociological, like, well, most people in the world say they're Christian, and most people in the world fit these things. So that's what Christianity is. And I don't want to have my definition of Christianity be primarily aspirational. And so when we get into these sorts of things, well, real Christianity isn't like that. It becomes a way of saying hashtag not all Christians. And the way that force that takes is usually to let us off the hook and think that we're part of the exception, rather than notice in the way that we're intermeshed. And so bringing up like, hey, everywhere this happens, not just the church, like what's the consequence of that approach?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
Does it actually enhance and make us fight more for liberation? Or does it make us think, well, thank goodness I'm a Lutheran. We don't have that shit here. I've seen Lutherans talk that way because hashtag not all Christians, and the Lutheran church is fucked up big time. Every denomination in this country is fucked up when it comes to patriarchy, big time.
Big time. Yeah. Hashtag big time.
Yeah, the fact that I couldn't be ordained easily within most Christian denominations that are even progressive. Why? Yeah, I don't really know. And this is where comments back and forth via Facebook are hard. So I'll grant that maybe we didn't get at your point. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to get at it.
All right. Well, we will be back again next week.
Hopefully. We'll see what happens. Maybe the comet will hit the earth and it'll save us all.
Don't look up.
Don't look up.
See
See
ya.
you next time, everybody.